While Botswana has made notable legal strides toward equality, access to essential services remains uneven, particularly for people of diverse sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression, known as SOGI, in rural areas. In an exclusive interview with YTV News, human rights organizations say a significant urban rural divide persists. While hate speech and crimes are more visible in towns and cities, rural areas often present a different reality, where silence, stigma, and limited access to services shape lived experiences. Activists say these experiences are not uniform. Transgender individuals and lesbian women in rural areas often face heightened stigma, limited access to healthcare, and social isolation.
So we must acknowledge that in the northeast, or where there might be a transit town or high levels of tourism, there are some pockets of acceptability. So where norms are accepting of diverse individuals, where people can be flamboyant, where it's well known that there's someone down the street who happens to be queer. And I think this environment is very different from those who are maybe in central Kalahari, where there's a little bit there's a little more ignorance, where they don't find that LGBTIQ visibility as much. And so you find that, there's a little bit of a difference and a variance, and it's important to just sort of recognize and acknowledge that across rural settings. I think in terms of Success Capital's programming, one thing that has made a difference is in community dialogues, where we stop at, public transit points, where we go to recreational areas, where we stop even at a kotla, and we're able to have conversations with the broader community around LGBTIQ experiences, not just within that context, but also outside. Because we realize that sometimes when we bring some of those members of the LGBTIQ community, it becomes very difficult for them and to share some of their experiences with people that they know, right? Especially because in some instances there are relationships and extended family members who would be in that space. And so it's a lot more easier and comfortable to have that uncomfortable conversation with community members when we're referring to the national context and the national picture of LGBTIQ experiences.
So during these dialogues, we get to understand that even though others have gone to school, these issues of intersex are new to them. And why are they new to them is because these issues are issues that have been secrecy. The issues of sex, as in biological makeup, are not talked about in a family setting. Issues of sex as in intimacy are also not talked about. So because of secrecy, there are no conversations. So one thing that we learned is that there is a lot that we can learn, because some would share how how they dealt with the issues of intersex babies at birth, when they gave birth at home, whereby there were no clinics and they do home birth. So they would share their experiences. So you find that there is a lot that is not talked about, and through these conversations that we have during Kotla meetings, we get to learn about them.
With the intention to bridge this gap, the organizations are targeting remote communities to raise awareness. However, Gatsa says there is more pushback, particularly when discussions challenge deeply rooted cultural and gender norms. At the same time, they note that resistance often shifts when conversations are introduced through trusted community platforms such as the Kotla.
When you speak about gender equality, there's a little bit of pushback. When you speak about gender-based violence, there's a little bit of pushback, because then people start speaking about their rights. To give an example, even when we're speaking about abortion, there were lots of men who then would push back and say, but my parental rights were not respected, knowing full well that in many instances, and so I think it's important to just sort of recognize that what someone says might not always be the same in how it manifests in society, especially in rural locations, because we see how people comment on social media. easier, when they're away from the public's eyes and when they can anonymously target LGBTIQ individuals. So I think it's just recognizing that there's a lot of hypocrisy. There's there's a culture of silence where, especially, when someone knows that they've got someone who's intersex in their home or someone who happens to be trans and gender diverse, they might be accepting just at a household level, but not necessarily wanting to extend outside to whether it's extended family members or society at large.
The organizations are also engaging community leaders, including 𝐬𝐭𝐢𝐥𝐞𝐬, as key entry points to foster dialogue and gradually shift attitudes around gender and identity. This approach is helping to localize conversations around human rights, making them more acceptable within traditional settings.
We have engaged with 𝐒𝐢𝐥𝐞𝐬, and we've found that there have been various experiences where they're able to say gore batsadi ba khona go tla ba ngongorega ko kgosing gore nyame, they're not sure how to handle this child, or sesadinyana, and so forth. And I think for us it's sort of recognizing that some of the traditional leaders are able to appreciate that there is diversity. However, narratives still remain where they sit and talk about the westernization or Western influence of LGBTIQ. And I think for us, it's just recognizing that the human rights environment is a little bit easier for people to become more visible, for people to express themselves. And I think ultimately, when they speak about Gaborone, they speak as if it's something that ultimately, influenced that. Whereas we're recognizing that this individual is probably working in Gaborone, probably in a relationship that's enabling, where they met other people who they can identify with, and where they have found psychological support structures where they're able to sort of work through some of the issues that they might have always been trying to figure out and didn't necessarily have the language, the words to ensure that they're able to express themselves in that way. And so I think, the more that a lot of individuals became more independent, the more that they were comfortable within their own skin. And I think it's also important to say that there are lots of people who might have been educated in Gaborone, worked in Gaborone, and got transfers to rural areas. And so you find that there's a difference in how they're treated because of class, right? Because why bereka, because why mogela, because they're contributing to society. So they're seen a little bit differently compared to the one that is in poverty.
As an organization, we realize that targeting institutions doesn't really help us a lot. So best is to reach out to traditional settings such as the 𝐒𝐢𝐥𝐞𝐬, where we reach out the general community. Right now in Gaborone, you find that people like people who sell sweets, tech shop owners or taxi drivers, they are not reached out. However, these are the people who you will find that they can even scream at a person who look different, but yet they are not informed. So as an organization, we took a stand to say that let's go out and reach out to these people who do not affiliate with any institutions. So that's why we've been going around the country sensitizing people through 𝐒𝐢𝐥𝐞𝐬 meetings.
Beyond awareness, the organizations have introduced programs aimed at empowering communities economically. These include CV development and support in applying for youth funding opportunities such as YGF, as well as guidance on accessing LEA and SEDA. These initiatives aim to reduce vulnerability by equipping LGBTIQ plus individuals with sustainable livelihoods, particularly as donor funding continues to decline. However, organizations acknowledge that access to these opportunities in rural areas remains limited due to stigma, lack of information, and utility barriers. Experts further note that gender norms in rural settings often reinforce silence, making it more difficult for women and gender diverse individuals to seek support or report abuse. For many in these communities, the impact is deeply personal.
As someone who doesn't feel comfortable in wearing skirts or putting on dresses, you are forced to do that for you to get help. Kore le minor thing hela se sa go tlhokeng gore o feel comfortable, you are forced to ka gore ke one melao ya ko magaeng and all that. Mo ditleliniking, yes, we get help like any other people, but then when it comes to safe sex communities, they are rare to be found. That's the thing, let me say, radio at all. Radio that you can't find them. And then also when it comes to the kinds of couple testing, when you go there with your partner for you to test, there are some questions that you're going to get. At some point they're going to make you uncomfortable in that. Society, people always talk, right? So gonna those remarks time and again every day. So for you to survive, you have to live with them. As long as hela ba sa tseye sepe mo go wena, ba so peace ya utswega gone mme hela re tshelela ka avoidance.
The broader human rights discourse has always been centered with nothing for us without us. So it is very pivotal to have the marriage equality court case because one, we have often been the members of the LGBTQ community has often been left out.
While these initiatives are creating pathways for inclusion, bridging the rural-urban gap will require sustained engagement, resources and community-led solutions, ensuring that no one is left behind, regardless of where they live or how they identify. 𝐬𝐿GBTIQ, White TV News.